Morning, everybody. My name is Jared O'Leary. I've been playing drums since 1998, and today I'm going to be answering a bunch of different drumming-related questions. Now, in these practice streams, I like to share like what I practice, how I practice it, etc., or I'll answer a bunch of questions. I have all these streams up available on the tube of you underneath the Drumming Live Streams playlist, and there's over 300 videos in here, so you can check out how I practice. But today, we're going to be answering a bunch of questions. Now, I will often take questions that people will ask me, and I'll put them into this Drumming Tips playlist, which is also on YouTube. Just scroll past the members' first one. Those are all scheduled to release publicly, so just stay tuned. They're going to come out. But there are currently 77 videos that are available now, over a dozen hours of drumming tips to help you along your drumming journey. Now, you might be like, Jared, why would I trust you with your own drumming journey? What do you know about this thing? Like I said, I've been drumming since 1998. I've been teaching since 2003. I have a bachelor's, master's, PhD in music education. I'm an award-winning performer, educator, and scholar, blah, 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 blah. So I've got a wide range of experience, having taught every grade, kindergarten through doctoral student, and having worked in percussion for multiple decades now. So I know some stuff, but I still have a lot of stuff to work on, hence why, I do these practice streams. Now, whenever I'm demonstrating anything in these streams, all of these are available on my home tab of YouTube. I do drumming, gaming, computer science stuff because I'm a nerd that likes to create content. But when you click on any of these headers, it shows you just the drumming content or just the gaming content. So here's all the playlists. But if you go to the link that's at the top of any one of the descriptions, it takes you to here, which is my website. If you're on vertical, it's /drum at jaredoleary.com. We've got 56 chop exercises, over 900 grid variations, a bunch of timing exercises, over 100 of those. We've got 55 drum charts, over 400 marching bass exercises, just under 300 technique exercises, and then here's the drumming tips playlist I just showed you, as well as the live streams, as well as the lessons, etc. So you can check those out if you are interested in doing so. Now, I am going to be including timestamps in the description for this to kind of show you all the different topics that I'm discussing when I'm demonstrating something or answering a bunch of different questions. So if you are watching this after the fact, you can just look in the description and you can see what I was talking about for this particular stream, as well as any one of the other streams, if that so interests you. Now, I need to remember to press this foot pedal so I can actually, quickly find the timestamps for what I was talking about and when. So let me do that. Cool, it works. Okay, so first question on here. So what is slicing on drums and when is it bad? So what you want to ideally go for whenever you're playing is a perpendicular stroke where it is going straight down into the head. If you have any kind of a glancing blow or a slice when you're playing, it's going to minimize the sound quality that you can get off of this. It's the same thing for like a trajectory of like a bullet or like even just like a punch. If you do a glancing blow for any one of those, it's going to be less impact, less power than if it hits it straight on. So same thing with drumming. When you're drumming, you want to make sure that your stick is going straight up and down as opposed to at an angle like this. Go ahead and add an angle. The wider the angle, the less sound you're going to get out of the head and the less power you can get behind your playing. So you want to make sure that you're trying to get that ideal sound. Now, the greater the slice, the less the sound quality. But volume is also determined by your velocity of the stick into the head minus the stick contact. So when you are doing this, if I am squeezing the stick and really absorbing the sound and hitting into it like this, it's going to lessen the amount of volume as opposed to if I let go of the stick and let it happen naturally so that it can move around in my hand. If I speed up how fast my wrist is going into it, while again not squeezing the stick, you can get even more power out of it. Okay, so what does this have to do with slicing? So with drum kit, where you're using a microphone, it might not matter as much if you're slicing on the drums. You could get away with slicing, and it won't really matter because you can just turn up the gain on your microphones, and people will still be able to hear it. There's also only one player who is playing on drum kit in a group, usually speaking. So it really doesn't matter how you're looking because you don't have to match the people next to you, which is very different than if you are on a drum line. If you're on a drum line, slicing matters for two different reasons. One is it's a visual tick. So if a judge sees one player playing like this and another playing so that they are moving straight up and down, then that is just a visual tick that a judge is going to be able to look at and go, they don't really look the same, so it kind of impacts how they will interpret the way it sounds. The other thing that matters is, again, the volume of it. So for rudimental, it's not like you're going out there with a tenors or a snare drum and you have like a microphone on your drum, unlike drum kit. So we need to focus on being able to project across an entire stadium. So if you are going straight into the head as opposed to doing a slice, then that's going to improve the impact of the stick into the head. Now, here's some different ways that you can actually work on this to improve it over, or if you are getting a slice, you can practice it. How do I want to phrase this? If you are slicing, here's some ways that you can improve this. So one is you can get in front of a mirror or in front of a camera and practice so that your stick is pointing straight down toward the mirror or toward the camera. So you can see whether or not you're getting any kind of a slice like this with like traditional grip, or if you're playing like match grip, if you're getting any kind of a slice like this when you're playing like that. So practice in front of a mirror or a camera to help out with that. But another way you can do this is just put a stick in front of or behind your stick so it's gently guiding the stick to get yourself used to practicing straight up and down. The only thing you got to remember is that when you're practicing this, you don't want to unintentionally have an angle and just increase the slice by practicing by holding this at an angle as opposed to perpendicular to the head. Cool. Slicing. Oh, I should have done that with the full camera like this, but it's not working. There we go. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so the next one is on balancing time when practicing multiple instruments or pieces. Ooh, this was a really good question that I received on YouTube. So was that last one about slicing. So how do you balance practicing multiple instruments or pieces? So for example, if you're preparing for an audition, you might be doing a snare solo and a marimba solo. So how do you spend your time between those two? So one thing that I highly recommend doing is front load your learning and then spread out the refinement phase. So try and get it memorized as fast as possible and get to the point where you can play from start to finish as fast as possible, and then spend the remainder of your time just refining over the time. Don't just like spread it out so that like on week 1, I'm going to learn like the first page. On week 2, I'm going to learn the second page. And then by like the very last week, I'm going to learn the last page. Don't do that. Try and learn it all as fast as possible and then spread it out. You need to be able to spread it out for the refinement so that way you can process it in your sleep. So that way your brain can develop and memorize it faster and kind of like help you just improve it while you're sleeping. It's kind of a weird concept, but it does actually work over time, which is why when you like stay up really late to like memorize something for a test is like in one ear out the other, it's because you didn't spend time with it and allow your brain to like process the learning in smaller chunks over an extended period of time. Instead, if you're batching it all at once and you do that, then it makes it so that you will not remember it and not be able to execute on it as well as if you spread it out over time. Okay, so there are some different ways that you can go about doing this. One is like an even distribution. So you can work on them for equal parts throughout the day. So like I'm going to spend an hour on the snare solo, an hour on a marimba solo if I have like 2 hours to practice. Another way that you can do this is actually to alternate each day. So maybe you'll do like 2 hours on your snare solo and 2 hours on a marimba solo on the next day and just keep going back and forth between those two. Again, you're giving yourself time to process it in between to be able to improve over time. But another way that you can approach this instead of doing like an even distribution or an even balance is to have an uneven balance. So focusing on the areas that you need or want to improve more. So if you're weak in one area, focus on that more than the other one. So for example, I myself am weak on marimba compared to my rudimental chops. So if I were preparing for an audition where it required like rudimental and marimba, I'd spend more of my time on the marimba piece than I would on the rudimental stuff. But it might be the opposite for you if you have more experience with marimba as compared to rudimental. So whenever you're preparing for something, think about how fast you can learn it. Try and do that as quickly as possible. And then think about what kind of a distribution you want over time. It might start off where it is an uneven balance where you're spending more time towards marimba and less time towards snare at the beginning when you're refining things. And then by the end of it, you might have more of an even distribution where you're spending equal amount alternating each day or whatever. So experiment and figure out what works best for you, but try that out and hopefully that'll help with your preparation for auditions or for wherever it is that you're trying to improve, if it's multiple pieces or multiple instruments. Cool. Okay, so let's see. Ooh, okay, so this is kind of like a three-parter here. The first part is talking about success as a horizon. And I really like this quote. So here we go. Success as a musician is a horizon that is always expanding. So you'll reach some milestones along the way in a given context, but that context will almost always expand. So, for example, like you might start off local. You might be like, I want to become the best at my school. Great. Then when you get to be the best at the school, you're likely going to go, well, what about becoming the best in the region? And then when you become one of the best in the region, okay, well, what about at the national level? What about at the international level? So as you continue to hit these milestones, whether it becomes like center snare, or section leader, or first chair, or all state, or whatever, it's going to continue to expand where you want to move into the next thing to progress. So that's a typical thing for many people to experience. It also expands so that you are trying to learn like harder instruments or harder repertoire. So if you're a percussionist, you might be like, okay, well now I want to learn marimba. I've like mastered the snare drum. Now I want to learn this other thing. Although mastery is subjective and there's always more to improve. But it might also be like, okay, well now I've worked on mallets, but now I want to work on timpani. So you can learn different instruments. Or I've gotten really good at this one particular piece on marimba. Now I want to learn a harder piece that is more challenging that will push me in different ways. So even if you're like focusing on the same context and you're not comparing yourself to others, for your own playing, you might want to learn more difficult more difficult pieces to work on. And again, that's just kind of natural. So it may never feel like what you have done is good enough when you're practicing because there's always more to learn, always more to improve. So what I recommend doing is really focusing on learning to enjoy the process and avoid comparing yourself with others to try and prevent the burnout that so many musicians experience, especially when you're in like a school of music. And let's say you're an undergrad, you're comparing yourself with the master students and even some of the doctoral students, and you're looking at them and going, well, I'm not going to be able to get there. Well, you're not necessarily thinking about how they've had maybe a decade or more experience than you have performing the instrument. Like, yeah, you can totally get there. It's just going to take some time. So really focus on yourself and focus on the process of improving over time rather than comparing yourself to others. Which, speaking of, that's the next topic, but let me get some water real quick. ASMR. Enjoy. Okay. Oh, okay. So I want to actually show this. So this is my curriculum vitae, so my CV. Okay, let me move this around. And we already talked about that. Okay. If you compare yourself with others, you will always miss out on some context that they have that you're not able to see through something like curriculum vitae or whatever, what you see on social media, wherever. So you will likely vividly remember the failures that you've had that have led to the successes that you've already accomplished and whatnot in life. But you're only able to see the end result of other people's hard work without actually being able to see the many failures along the way that they experienced to get where they are right now. So for example, on my curriculum vitae, so I have a bachelor's, master's, PhD, and my dissertation won the outstanding dissertation of the year in 2018, which is the highest award you can possibly receive for the dissertation out of the entire field. So anyone in the world can compete for this. What you don't see is that it took me like 2.5 years just to write the proposal to be able to get to that point with that, and the number of like failed drafts that I had along the way to be able to eventually win that award. You'll see here that I have like over a dozen publications, and what you don't see are the different publications that were not accepted, that were denied, or the number of revisions that each one of these had. Some of these publications was like a multi-year process, like these book chapters and whatnot, on average for like 2 or 3 years from the first time sitting down to write the first word of it to the time it was actually published. It took multiple edits, multiple revisions, etc. You don't see any of those failures along the way. All you see on my CV is like, great, Jared has like a dozen or more publications on here, and you don't see all the failures. It's part of the process, though. You'll see over 120 different presentations that I've done from the local level all the way up through the international level. And again, you don't see the ones that weren't accepted. And you don't see that some of these presentations didn't go well. I presented them and I was like, wow, I won't do it that way again. Or wow, that did not resonate at all with the audience like I thought it would, etc. That's a normal part of the process. But you don't see any of that on here. All you see is, wow, that's a lot of presentations. Not all of them were home runs. Same thing for these grants. I've worked on multiple millions of dollars of grants. But I've been on more grant proposals that were denied than grants that actually succeeded. And having been a reviewer for the Department of Education at these grants, like most of the grants are denied because they just don't meet the qualifications or they're not as good as some of the other applicants in there. Again, that's just a normal part of this process. I've won all these like honors and awards and whatnot as an educator, as a performer, as a scholar, but I've lost out on more than I've actually won. So while this looks fancy, it doesn't show the number of times that I failed along this process. Same thing for like teaching all these like different classes, whether it's publicly or collegiately at university level, etc. You just don't see that on somebody's CV. So when you're looking at this and you're like, wow, like Jared's done a lot of things. You're like, yes, you're right, I have. I'm a bit obsessive. And I'm obsessive about my career and like learning and trying to help other people. But you don't see the number of failures on here. Like I can say from a marketing perspective, like advertise myself and be like, I'm a former center snare for high school, college, and for DCI. What you don't hear in that is like, wow, that sounds cool. Like section leader, center snare, etc. But you don't know the number of times I've been cut from drum lines. You don't know the number of times that I didn't make snare or I originally wanted to be a tenor player, didn't make that, etc. So like if you compare yourself with other people just by looking at this kind of stuff, it can do more harm than good in the long run because you don't see all those failures along the way, which are a part of the process. Another thing that a lot of people will do when they look at like drummers online is the drummers online who are sharing like a cover of something or like them playing like through a lick. It might have taken them 100 tries just to get that one like rep that sounds decent. And they'll share that one rep or ignoring all the 99 that came before it. And again, this is just a normal part of the process. So what you hear on the day-to-day is you are practicing and you're hearing your failures every single time you pick up your pair of sticks. And that's normal. I hope these like practice streams where I'm like showing how I actually practice help normalize what it looks like to try and improve and to hear failures every single day when you're working on stuff. But try not to compare yourself to other people. And again, just focus on the process with your own learning. And that will help you out in the long run more so than looking at others. You can look at others for inspiration, but don't assume that there weren't failures along the way. Like I'm demonstrating in my CV, like there are more failures than there are successes on here. Just because this like CV is relatively long, the list of failures that I've had along the way to get here is significantly longer than the length of this particular CV. And that's not an exaggeration by any means. I've just been, in this career for a while because I'm relatively old compared to a lot of people. Okay, let's see here. Ooh, okay, so this one, I want to pull up this. We got a visual aid here. Whoops. That one. Okay, so I want to talk about improvement and how it's not exponential or even linear. So I've got these like visuals here to kind of help me up with this. I often hear people talking about how you should strive for 1% improvement every single day. And that, in the long run, is going to set yourself up for failure, or it's just, frankly, going to be unrealistic for the expectations. So here's why. So for example, as a musician, progress as a musician is never going to be exponential or even linear. It's likely going to be the opposite of exponential. So what we expect is the more time I put into this, the more my skill is going to improve. Or if we go with like the 1%, poorly drawn here, exponential curve, it's like, okay, well, I'm getting 1% better. And then over time, that 1% becomes 10%, which becomes 50%, which just continue to get better. If you think about this graph and like really kind of put it to the extreme here, if we go far enough along here, we can assume, okay, in an hour's worth of work, I could get a year's worth of progress. And that's just like not going to happen. Like the amount of time that you put into this is actually going to look more like this over time. You're going to make exponential gains at the beginning where it's going to go much faster. And then over time, it's going to plateau and slow down. Part of that is going to be in the first like 50 hours of your progress, where your brain is literally rewiring itself through this process known as myelination, where it is like basically expanding from like a single lane highway to like a multi-lane highway where it's like 10 lanes instead of like 2, with your the like axons, neurons like firing in your brain, etc. So you're going to slowly be able to improve your timing of the neural firings as well as the speed of the neural firings in that first 50 or so hours, and then it becomes harder to do that over time. So let me pull this up so I can make sure I do this correctly, because I thought through all of this before I started talking. Okay, so initial progress may feel very large, but eventually the improvements will become just smaller and smaller. So it's not going to, I already said that. So hitting a plateau is normal because there's just, quite frankly, less improvement to be made. But the trick is to either find the minor improvements that can be made to be able to move forward a little bit, just like slowly progressing, or to move on to a different project, whether it's like a different piece or even like a different instrument. Like if you're working on snare, work on marimba. If you're working on marimba, work on tenors, etc. Like there's many things that you can do, or you can just be like, I'm going to work on a different piece. So the way that I actually like to think about this is it's more like carving a statue from stone than it is like just trying to strive for that 1% improvement where you get that exponential curve. Because again, that's just not going to happen. So if you start with like a block of stone and you start like hitting off big chunks of it and slowly moving it, okay, I'm going to like have the head up here and have the body down here, etc. You're going to chop off the big chunks on it. Okay, you'll make a lot of progress initially. But eventually, as you're continuing to refine it, you're eventually going to be like, okay, I'm going to use just like a little bit of sanding right here and remove right there. I might be able to like chisel off just a little piece right here. Then it gets slowly a little bit better. You're just refining over time rather than making those exponential gains, etc. So again, find ways to continue to make those little minor adjustments over time, or move on to another project if you start to hit that plateau when you are practicing whatever it is that you're practicing on. Again, it's just a normal part of the process. Let me close that. Okay. I think I'm going to show those later. So I'll keep that up. Okay, so the next topic that I want to talk about is practicing fast, slowly, and the importance of that. So practicing by speeding up 10 or 20 BPMs at a time may slow you down in the long run. So here's why. So there's a gray area between like slower fast technique and a I can't speak. There's a gray area between a slow technique and a fast technique that people often use. What you often see is like if you're playing any one of these like thousands of play-alongs on my YouTube channel and website is people might like jump up like 10, 20 beats a minute when they're working on it. But if you're practicing something fast, you might use a different technique than when you're practicing something slow. That is something that you should strive to avoid. What you should instead try and do is practice fast while going slow. So if I'm practicing these at like, I don't know, 40 beats a minute, what I'm going to do is go one click at a time where I'm just slowly, incrementally getting faster while playing with a nice, light, relaxed accent where I'm just kind of pulling the accent back and letting the weight happen rather than like forcing it in like that. If I go that one click at a time like these play-alongs are designed for, then it makes it so that there's like no gaps in my technique. So what I'll often see with students is, let's say they can play something comfortably at like 60 beats a minute and something comfortably at like 120 beats a minute, like let's say a flam drag or something like that. What they will end up having is between maybe 90 and 100 beats a minute is there's this weird gray area where they like can't play it well. Like they can play it better if it's slow and they can play it better if it's fast, but they can't play in this middle area. That's that gray zone that we need to be able to work through. If you, instead of jumping up 10, 20 clicks, etc. when you're practicing, if you just use these play-alongs and go one click at a time, then it will prevent that from happening because it will force you to work through that gray area and to apply that technique consistency without having those like mechanical changes in your hands. Like let's say you're going from like a wrist technique to a finger technique when you're going slower to faster. This can help you to expose that and to try and work through that. So I highly recommend going through these by playing fast while going slow and just going one click at a time faster. For any one of these like play-alongs, like let's say you want to work on, I don't know, your accent taps or something, you can go into the description in here, like for this particular exercise, and open this up, and it shows you the BPM, so you can just find whatever you want to work on. So if you want to start off at 60 BPMs, you just click right here, and then it'll go gradually speed up 1 BPM at a time. If that's too slow for you, cool, you can start off at, I don't know, 130 BPM and go all the way up to 200. Whatever it is that you need to work on. We've got a huge range for all of these thousands of free play-alongs. Okay. Boop. Let me see. What's the next topic we're going to talk about? Speaking of accent taps. Okay. So now I want to talk about like how to relax in accent taps, specifically after an accent. We'll go with this view so you can see it better. Okay, let me review my notes real quick. Okay, here's how to play relaxed accent taps. So I often see people when they're doing like an accent and they try and get a tap after this, they will squeeze the stick either at the fulcrum or all of the fingers to stop the stick from rebounding, from going back up. Because we don't want to have accent taps that are like this when you're playing on drumline. We want to have very distinct accent taps that are going on here. When I'm doing this, I'm not squeezing the stick. In fact, I can do this without even having my front 2 fingers on here and just play this with the back fingers only on contact on the stick. That's what you want to be able to get to with this. There's a spacing change between an accent where my hand is more open and a tap where my hand is more closed. So the amount of space for the stick to move is changing, but I'm not actually applying any kind of pressure in my hand to squeeze and stop the stick from doing that motion. So one way that you can actually practice the accent tap is to just practice it with your wrist and to just move your wrist like this. And that's your accent tap right there. All you're going to do is then just like slide the stick into there and not change anything about your wrist to be able to get the accent taps in there. So if I'm playing an accent tap, I'm opening up some space for the stick to be able to get like a full height. And then when I play the tap immediately after this, it's just a stroke that starts up and ends down. And so all I'm doing is just stopping my wrist and having less space in here than if I were to play legato full strokes like this. To let the stick bounce back up, I have space like this. That space makes it so the stick rebounds, but if I stop the space, it's closed off, it makes it so the stick will stop with my wrist. So you can play accent taps like this by working on this. Now, a really good exercise for working on the accent taps and working through the 4 different stroke types is 2 up, 2 down. So up, up, down, down. What are the 4 strokes types and how does that work on that? We have an up stroke that starts up and ends up, so up, up. We have an up stroke that starts up and ends down. We have a down stroke, a stroke that starts down and ends down, so like this. And then a stroke that starts down and ends up. So up, 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 down, 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 up. So when you play tap, tap, accent, accent, tap, tap, up, up, down, down, that works on all 4 stroke types so that you can practice this. So again, you can practice it with your wrist only. You can practice it by taking your fingers off the stick to experiment with just the different spacing change with the back fingers of the stick. And then you can practice it using the up, up, down, down exercise. Now, if we go back here under the accent taps, there's a few exercises that are specifically for this. So the accent relaxer and the tap relaxer have 2 up, 2 down variations on here for the accent relaxers and the tap relaxers. So I highly recommend checking these out. And the exercise is just 2 up, 2 down. And for this particular one, what it's doing is it's starting with everything at tap height, and you slowly raise the accents. So it's 4-inch accents, and then 6, then 9, and then 12. And then it lowers it so that it's 9, 6, 4, and then all taps. The accent relaxer is the opposite of this. So it starts off with everything all high, all at one height, and then it slowly lowers the taps. So you're going down all the way down to 3-inch taps, and then all the way back up to full height. So these are 2 excellent and opposite ways that you can work on 2 up, 2 down to keep your taps relaxed or your accents relaxed. So I highly recommend checking those out. Okay. Let's see. The next topic, fingers and traditional motion. Oh, yeah. Let's do this way. Or do I want to do... No, yeah, we'll do it this way. So it's like, should I do the overhead or this one? We'll do this one. Okay. I've often seen drummers teach traditional grip with forearm and wrist rotation, but I've also seen it with the thumb motion or thumb and index finger motion, or even palm down approach. I'll see this with some like jazz drum kit players. But which one should you use for marching snare drum? So as a former center snare on every drum line that I marched, I've never actually practiced any finger motion ever for anything traditional related. I've never actually even been taught finger motion by anyone who's ever marched snare, and I've never taught finger motion. So why does it look like snare lines aren't actually using the wrist when they're playing something like fast taps, low notes? So one of the reasons why is because the resting height is super low. So the wrist motion is very minimal. So if you take a look at this, the amount of motion that I'm moving on the rest height, the rest height when I'm playing here is such a small motion, but because this is a lever and we have our lever all the way back here, the amount of motion that we have to do on the wrist is even smaller. So it might look like they're not using wrist rotation when playing taps like this, and it might look like it's actually thumb motion that's moving like this, but it's not. This is still a wrist stroke that I'm doing right here, and this is actually high for like a snare drum. We can go even lower, especially if you're playing a tilt. It can go even lower, etc. So when you're looking at a snare line and it looks like they're playing with finger rotation or finger motion, they're not. So they're not playing like this. When you do see fingers coming off the stick, for example, the lower notes or even like the middle finger, like this, what's actually happening there is the fingers are coming off the stick to try and increase the speed of the rebound. So they're applying a little bit of a downward pressure from the fingers to get a faster stroke and a faster rebound on here and to get out of the way. But this can actually cause some tension in your hand that you should try and avoid. So if you're playing and you notice that your bottom 2 fingers are coming off the stick, if it's providing space for the stick to move, that can be okay. But if you start to notice tension down here or along here, that's a bad thing. So really focus on keeping those sticks really focus on keeping the fingers attached to the stick with a little bit of room for the stick to be able to kind of breathe and to be able to vibrate within here. But same thing with the middle finger. If you notice that your middle finger is coming off of the stick like this, then you might actually feel the tension along here or maybe even on the back side of your forearm. So make sure that you don't experience that. One of the ways that you can try this is move the fingers off the stick as far as you can go or straighten the middle finger as much as possible while you're playing, just so you can experience what the extreme version of that bad technique feels like, and then gradually bring those fingers in or gradually curve that middle finger around so you can slowly kind of like feel that difference between a tense technique and a relaxed technique by going between both ends of the extreme for the amount of tension in your hand. So again, the only drummers that I see who will maybe work up a thumb technique are drum kit players who don't need to worry about playing with other people, and or snare drummers who are trying to work up fast singles. But the only time they ever do that is when they are working on their own for like a solo, for like I&E or something, rather than with a full line, because it creates too many inconsistencies with the sound quality when you're playing with this thumb technique. But again, as a former center snare who has been teaching since 2003, I have never taught anyone to play that way, and I've never played with a thumb technique whenever I'm working on traditional grip. It just looks like you might be using finger technique because, again, the leverage, the amount of movement that I got to do to be able to get the stick to move this far is just so minuscule that it looks like I'm not rotating my forearm, but I'm actually rotating my forearm just a small amount. Cool. So that one's that. Let's see. What's the other topic? The next one. Ooh, yeah. Okay, so this one, we're going to go here. Okay, so now I want to talk about like 3 rudiments to work on for high school, in particular. Okay, so here, sorry, I want to make sure that I start these with like some kind of a hook, because I turn these into like clips that I then share online, which will hopefully point people to these like free resources. So hopefully it'll help them along the drumming journey. So I've been like writing out the hooks on here to try and, just get better at that. But I screwed that one up. What are 3 rudiments that every snare drummer should learn if they're going to march on snare? So one is a flam drag, one is a cheese, and the last one is a flam 5. To work on this, I've got literally thousands of free exercises on my website. But if you go under the technique section and go to the Rudiment Builders playlist, this playlist is available on YouTube. If you scroll down, there are 3 variations for cheese builder, 3 variations for flam drag builder, and 3 variations for flam 5 builder. So let's talk about each one of these. So the very first one for each of these, it isolates out what each of your hands are going to be doing when you're playing a rudiment like a cheese. If it'll actually load. You can do it. So the very first variation for each one of these 3 rudiments is an isolation exercise that starts off with just the right hand for a cheese. So instead of playing like you do in like a flam accent builder, you put a diddle on that accent. Okay, so that's the first line, is just doing that. And then the next line, you're adding in one left hand, so the grace note. And then the next line, you add in another left hand, which is the left hand accent with the diddle on here, so the cheese. And then we add in another left hand. And then when we get to the second page here, it puts both hands together on the very first line. So you're playing a normal cheese here for 2 measures. And then it removes one right hand per line. So it removes this one. Then the next line, it removes the next one. And then it removes the grace note that was right here. And then finally, it removes the accent that was right here. So it's only the left hand. So this is a great way to work on it, where it is isolating out one hand at a time, gradually introducing in another hand until it's the composite rhythm, so that both hands together, as you would normally play like a cheese or a flam drag or a flam 5, and then it slowly removes the other hand so that it's just working on one hand at a time. So this allows you to refine both hands in isolation and together simultaneously in one exercise. Fantastic exercise, highly recommend it. Again, it's just cheese builder, flam drag builder, and flam 5 builder. We also have a second variation for each one of these. So again, just sticking with cheese. For this one, what it's doing is it has an accent pattern, just triplets, and then diddle on one, and then it's just flam on one, and then cheese on one. And then what it's doing is it's moving the accent pattern over to the second partial. And it plays the same thing, where it's just check, diddle, flam, cheese. And then it does it again with the accent on the third partial with check, diddle, flam, cheese. And so this is a great way to kind of prepare you for grid variations. Here's another way that you can work on this. This is the cheese builder variation 3. And so what this one is going to do is it has accent on one the entire time, and what's moving is the diddle, the flam, or the cheese. So we have check, diddle, flam, cheese. Check, the diddle's on 2, the flam's on 2, the cheese is on 2. And then check, diddle on 3, flam on 3, cheese on 3. So this is another way to prepare you for grid variations. And again, this playlist, whoops, go back. This playlist has variations for cheese builder, flam drag builder, and flam 5 builder, as well as other rudiments like how to speed up your paradiddles with the paradiddle zoom zoom exercise. Now, if we go back to here, I've got over 900 grid variations on here. So what I recommend doing if like you're trying to make snare or tenors on high school is focus on the rudiment on one for the basics. It could be like diddle on one or flam on one. But if you want to work on hybrid rudiments, the cheeses, the flam drags, and the flam 5s are great ways to work on this. Now, we've got it for triplet, and we've also got these for 16th notes. When you click on this, there are a bunch of different variations in here. For now, just focus on flam drag on one, either forward like this, or with the 1, 2, 4 accents, which are backward accent pattern. Don't have to worry about all the weird stuff like a flam 5 every 5 notes or things like that. Like, those are cool, But for right now, just focus on rudiment on 1 for the basic rudiments like fives, drags, and cheeses, as well as diddles and flams. And again, there's over 900 grid variations on here to keep you busy for a while. You can find this on the home tab of YouTube, or you can just find this at jaredoleary.com/drum. And then there's, thousands more other exercises to keep you and I busy for quite some time. New one daily. Okay, let me get some water. Throat's still sore from that Hot to Full boyfriend stream we did the other day. It was like, 5 hours? That was a lot of talking. Because it was like a text-based game, so I was like reading all of it. Whew. Okay, let's see. So the next thing I want to talk about is Moeller. So this one I'm going to do here. Okay. So, yeah, like that. So how is Moeller stroke different than just like a normal stroke? So Moeller stroke, instead of having the bead being the initiator of the motion, like the thing that moves first, whenever you're playing, Moeller will actually have the wrist bend and move to create like a whipping motion so that the bead is almost the last point of contact or the last point of motion when you're playing like this. So instead of playing like this, you will play like this when doing like an accent. Now, if you're doing something like triplets, if you're doing it with Moeller, you're going to slowly move the wrist up so you can get that whipping stroke in there on the accent. And this might be fine on drum kit, but on drumline, it's not going to sound great. So what's happening is you're slowly changing the angle of the stick, which the more it angles, the less sound quality you can get out of it, as opposed to playing like this. So the more angled, the worse it's going to be. So if you play with an extreme Moeller technique, it actually changes your sound quality. So this is fine when you're the only drummer playing. In fact, it might make it sound better than less robotic if you're doing it on drum kit. But for rudimental, we want to have it sound robotic because we want to play the exact same way as like everybody else who is also playing the same thing on the same instrument. So for snare line, that may be like 8 or 10 of you who are trying to all sound the same way, or even 3 or 4. And we don't want to have strokes like this. So a modified Moeller is often used with rudimental drummers in order to get some weight or power behind the stroke without making a huge change in the angle of the smaller interior notes or the taps before an accent. So if you're working on Moeller technique whenever you're playing, think about how much of an angle you're going to get and how much that might change the sound quality of those lower notes when you're working on this. But it is the wrist moving before the bead of the stick if you choose to work on Moeller stroke. Good morning, Jeffrey. Okay. Ooh. All right, so this one I want to be here. So we're going to talk about like how to improve march and bass drum. Okay. Bass lines are unique because you can't hear the entire part without the entire section there to actually play through it. But how do you practice bass when the rest of the section isn't there? So if you're at home practicing by yourself, what can you do to work on this? So the first thing that I highly recommend is to focus on playing to your feet. You need to have your feet in time, so you need to always be using a metronome or using one of these play-alongs to make sure that your feet are in time and then your hands are playing to your feet. Okay, that's great advice and all, but what specific exercises should you work on? What I actually recommend working on are timing exercises and timing transition exercises. So in here we have a bunch of different timing exercises that are for triplet, for 16th note, for 8th note, etc. Whenever you go into any one of these, it has timestamps in the description so you can jump to whatever BPMs. So you could be like, I want to work on this at 103 beats a minute. When you click on it, it will then immediately start tapping you off and help you be able to work on your timing exercises. Now, because there are many more variations on here, the play along right here might not be the timing you want to work on, but their odds are going to be one. Now, in this particular timing exercise, we have two different sets of sticking. One is for starting off the right, so the very top set of sticking, and then the bottom one is for starting off the left. So check those out if you are interested in working on those particular timing exercises. Now, there's also timing transition exercises. So these exercises, if we go back to here, in the timing transition, this is going from one type of rhythm to another. So for example, eighth notes to 16th notes. Or what about eighth notes into quintuplets or fivelets? Or what about, if we scroll down, 16th notes into a 7/4 pattern? You can go there and you can work on that one. So there are 51 different videos in here that are specifically working on transitioning from one rhythm to another. So this is a great way that you can work on this. Now, a lot of these are currently members first, but they're all scheduled to release for free. So these aren't like behind a paywall or anything. It's just early access if you're a member and you want those. Now, another thing that I recommend working on are splits timing. So these exercises are really interesting in the way that they're developed, if I do say so myself. So if you want to work on, like, let's say your fours between you and another drummer, what this exercise does is it has both parts playing simultaneously, and then the next line that we're going to get to is going to mute the second part. So you can play the second part and fill it in while you're practicing this. You can hear drum one. And then the last two lines right here, it actually has it so that it mutes the first part so you can hear how does the second part sound and get the proper interpretation. And like with any one of these play-alongs, you can go into the timestamps and you can slow this one down as slow as 20 beats a minute, or you can go as fast as 160 beats a minute and everything in between. All you have to do is just click on it, and then again, it will immediately start tapping you off so that you can practice this. So there are a lot of variations in here for the splits timing. There's 161 videos in here that are specifically working on splits timing, and some of these are actually like laser beams for like 3 drums, 5 drums, etc., as well as down and up splits. So that's a great way that you can work on practicing these on your own. I also have a bunch of permutations for 3, 4, 5, and 6 drums. So let's say you have a 5 drum bass line. There are currently, for the permutations, 35 permutations that are for the 5 drums. And so if you click on this and just take a look at randomly, variation 29, here's a bunch of different rhythms that it works through for different permutations on the bass line, so you can practice marching bass exercises without actually having the rest of the line there with you. The last thing I'll mention for this is the best bass drummers are also just as good at snare drum or tenor drum as a snare and tenor player. So I highly recommend working on technique exercises for improving your bass, as well as working on like grid variations. And again, there's over 900 of those that you can check out. The vids that I make are goated. Hey, I appreciate that. There's, over 400 that are currently scheduled, so plenty more to come. I'm always going to work on more. Is working only with the play along okay? Or can I cause some sort of problems later? So I never have had any problems with a play along. It's basically like practicing listening in. So let's say you're not the like center snare or the center tenor. Your entire role is to just listen in to the person next to you closest towards the center. So if you are practicing with these play-alongs, it simulates that. So like if I wanted to work on listening in on rolls, I could go to the 16th Note Diddle playlist right here, and there are 19 videos that are specific for working on my rolls. And so I could work on listening in while practicing this way. If I was the center, I needed to be able to play with perfect interpretation while practicing. So this is also a great way to work on that as well, because it is forcing you to listen into basically a robot, a computer, that is playing with perfect interpretation on any one of these. So using play-alongs is better than using a metronome because of that ability to listen in and to hear the interpretation of the rhythm and get it perfectly rhythmically precise. But it is also helpful to work on your internal sense of timing, which will develop through these on its own. But if you put a metronome to half notes or to whole notes, and so you just hear like beep, beep while you're practicing, that will help you to be able to develop that sense of time over time if you're doing half notes or whole note practice. But the majority of what I would recommend doing is playing with these, so you can work on listening in and getting that proper interpretation, especially on stuff like the diddle timing exercises. Like if we go into here, it's specifically designed to work on preventing slurred and rushed diddles. So the way that this exercise is written out is we have diddle on 1, diddle on 2, diddle on 3. And for each one of those, it's got slurred, normal, rushed, normal. So it will allow you to feel and hear what the slurred and a rushed diddle sounds like, so you can actually play with perfect interpretation when you're doing this. So I highly recommend using the play-alongs to be able to do that. Can you play one of those splits timings? Oh, yeah. Since you're on YouTube, you can go listen to any one of those. So if you go to my home tab, the drumming content is here. And then if you click on the header for that, it shows you all of them. So the splits timing are inside of this bass drum exercises playlist, which has 412 videos in here. And the splits timings are at the top, but there's a ton of videos. It's still scrolling that are just bass drum exercises. For every single, and it's still scrolling, for every single one of these, the link at the top takes you to the page that I was on earlier, where things are organized neater on here. So we've got all the chop stuff organized way neater than what I can on YouTube. So it just makes it easier to be like, hey, where are the cheesy poofs exercises? Cool, it's under chops. We click on cheesy poofs and it takes you to that playlist. So that's just like easier for finding what you're trying to find for any one of those things. You love drummers? Me too. My wife's a drummer. Yeah. Gotta check out kick drum exercises. Mine are so weak. Yeah, I am actually getting a double bass. Here it's supposed to be sometime between like now and like February, so I'll eventually get one. But what I'd recommend for that, and what I'm planning on doing to work on it under the technique exercises, are the endurance and speed playlist. So if you go to the endurance and speed playlist, these are going to be great for working up your endurance and speed. You could do it with your hands, or you could do it with your feet. So any one of these exercises, if you just play through this with your feet, it's going to help you speed up your double bass. So I highly recommend doing that. Another thing that I'd recommend doing if you want to work on like a double stroke for a single foot, so the heel to toe, if you're doing something like that, is what I was demonstrating the other day, yesterday when I was playing. Underneath the timing transitions, the very first exercise that's in here called rebound. This one, if you just do snare, snare, bass, bass. And so you just go snare, snare, bass, bass, snare, snare, bass, bass, snare, snare, bass, bass, snare, snare, bass, bass. And you go through these, just keep doing 2 on hand, 2 on the foot. As it speeds up and then slows back down, this will help you to do that. What did I order for the double kick? So if you go to /gear on my website, it takes you to the stuff that I recommend. But the pedal that I currently have is the Demon Drive from Pearl, the single pedal. So what I ordered was the double pedal version of this. And it was not cheap. But yeah, so that's what I ordered for my double kick. And that's what we'll be doing. Okay, next question. Ooh, okay, so this one, this is about how to work on floppy flams. Why is it not going back? Oh, that's why, because it opened up a new page, a new tab, rather. Okay, here. So floppy flams are something apparently I can't pronounce. But I'll demonstrate them, and then I'll kind of talk through how to work on them so you can improve them. So how can you work on floppy flams? So they are when you are alternating 2 different flams, and it could be all at one height, or it could be at like 2 different heights where you're doing like an accent tap, etc. And you're playing them faster. So one way that you can work on this is to start so that your flams are small and just slowly raise the accents while keeping the grace note low. And then slowly lower the accents and speed that up over time. Another way to work on it is the opposite of that. So start with the grace notes high and slowly lower the grace notes while you keep the accents high, and then slowly raise the grace notes while you're doing that, and again, speed that up over time. But another way that I highly recommend working on your floppy flams would actually put them in grid variations that you see right here. So you could do this with triplet or with 16th notes. So if we go into this playlist that is specifically for flams, if you scroll down a little bit, there's a bunch of different variations of flams in here. There's like flams on taps, but there's the alternating flams variations. So if you click on here, it's just alternating flams the entire time. But while you're doing this, you're moving the accents. So you're going triplet, 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 bullet, triplet, 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 and you do this with triplets or with 16th notes. So I highly recommend working on this when you're working on your alternating flams. And with any one of these play-alongs, you just go into the timestamp, and you can go as slow as 40 on this one or as fast as 200. If you can play alternating flam grid at 200, I would love to see that. I think the most I've gotten is in like the 160s, but that is still very difficult to do with these extra heavy Hardeman hammer double tape sticks. But try it, it's fun. Good way to work on your floppy flams. And if you want more grid variations, there's literally over 900 more. So that'll keep you busy for a while with a variety of rudiments. Okay. All right, so the next topic that I was going to talk about, all right, so this one, let's see here. Okay, so I want to talk about taking a gap year for DCI or WGI, which is a controversial topic. There's a lot of opinions about it, but let me get some water quick. Got to stay hydrated. It's important. All right. What are the pros and cons to taking a gap year with DCI or with WGI? So one of the things that we need to consider with this is you can save money by actually earning more over a summer instead of losing earned and potential income. So what is earned income? So earned income is like money that you've already earned. So instead of spending it on tour fees, you can save that. Another is potential income, which is like the money that you would get from a job, whether it's like mowing lawns in the summer or teaching private lessons, etc. All of that money and the tour money is gone if you decide to do DCI or WGI. But another thing you need to consider is the amount of gains that you can get in terms of the improvements marching versus practicing on your own. If you are marching with a group, you are going to spend the summer refining a book and working on your movement, etc. If you are practicing on your own, you could have, instead of spending that time working on a book or show music, you could focus on the basics, like these technique exercises right here, and spend that time, like let's say you were spending 4 or 5 hours a day working on show music, you could instead spend it working on the basics, like improving your roll timing or your diddle timing or your speed of your diddles or your 3 strokes or whatever it is that you need to work on as an individual. You can sit there and focus on just that thing rather than what the group average needs to work on. So if you're in a sectional with, like, let's say 8 people, then you're going to work on whatever it is that will improve that line with all 8 of those people rather than the thing that you individually need to work on to improve. So if you have great flam drags, but the rest of the line isn't able to play a flam drag very well, you might spend a significant portion of your day working up those flam drags, even though you personally don't need to do this. So if you are practicing at home, you can make more gains than you are practicing in a group. But that depends on what you are practicing. So if you spend your time working on these technique exercises, great. If you spend your time working on these like 900 plus grid variations, great. But if you spend your time working on like show licks or chop exercises, might not be as great. You might not make as much progress as if you were to spend your time working on techniques. The same thing with working on a book or show. So when you are doing this, what I recommend doing is practicing by focusing on consistency of sound quality and technique, rather than the speed of your playing. So if you're using any of these play-alongs, like even if you decide to work on Blue Devil's like 99 Shopping Spree or whatever, go into the timestamps and go slow. Refine the technique and slowly speed up. That is likely not something you're going to be doing in rehearsal time or sectional time. You're likely going to be playing at performance tempo or a little bit under performance tempo to work something up. rather than like, I'm going to start at 40 and go one click at a time like you can with these play-alongs. So if you take a gap here, you can spend the time making huge gains with your progress if you focus on the basics instead of refining for the show. Now, one of the things that actually marching does is it forces you to spend time throughout the day actually improving. Whereas if you're on your own, it's really up to your discipline as an individual to go, okay, I'm going to spend X number of hours a day practicing. So if you're like doing all days, like back when I was marching, you would have your entire day planned for you. Like, we're going to do sectionals, and then we're going to do all ensemble, or we're going to do like drumline only, and then we're going to go back into sectionals. And you had your whole day planned. But you might have Netflix, or you might have friends who want to socialize, or you might want to go travel, etc. All of those things can take away from the time you would have spent if you're doing all days. So what you have to consider if you're going to do a gap year or a gap semester on DCI or WGI is, do you have the time, and will you actually invest the time wisely, if you know yourself, to actually sit there and practice this kind of thing, or not? You might not, and that's okay. Maybe marching is better for you because you'll actually pick up sticks. What I do recommend is setting aside consistent time to practice daily, and try not to let anything or anyone interrupt that. So have the same like couple of hours every single day. Like, hey, I'm just going to practice from like 8 to 10 every single morning, and then I'll go work my job in the afternoon, etc. And again, focus on the technique exercises, focus on slowly improving, and that will allow you to improve. When you're doing this, also set short, mid, and long-term goals. When you're working with a group, there are goals of just like trying to improve the stuff that is dirty as an ensemble. But when you're working on yourself, it's like, well, what do I work on? There's like just under 300 technique exercises. Which one of these do I do? What about the 900 plus grid variations? Which do I do? Like, it's hard to pick when there's literally a couple thousand exercises to practice here. But focus your time by developing some short, mid, and long-term goals. Like, if you want to be able to play Blue Devil's 99 Shopping Spree, you might want to work on like some of the rudiment builders down here in the technique exercises, or maybe some of the diddle exercises to improve your interpretation, which will make it so that you can play long-term the Blue Devil's Shopping Sprees that are on this page or on my YouTube channel. Was there something else? Oh, yeah. So another really important thing to focus on is to try and get feedback throughout the process. This can be in person with like private lessons with people, or this can be online from different sources. So some people will post like on Instagram or on Reddit, like, hey, here's my current ability on whatever it is that I'm working on. Do you have feedback for me? What I recommend is, if you're going to do that, is share at least 2 takes of that. Because if you only share the best rep, then what are the inconsistencies in that rep might not be... how do I want to phrase this? It might not be representative of the inconsistencies overall. So if you play at least 2 reps of, like, let's say a roll exercise, people are able to hear, okay, what changed and what was the same between each one of those reps? What was an inconsistent air and what is a consistent air to work on? So maybe you just had a brain fart and you're like, oh, I just forgot that, or I messed up the interpretation of that. But if you're playing it the same way poorly every single time, that will allow people to give higher quality feedback if you are seeking that online, that you could get if you were in person, where you're like, all right, let's play through this 5 times or whatever with a private lesson instructor, which I do highly recommend taking. And I say that as somebody who no longer teaches privately. I'd rather like create these online resources because it helps more people. But back when I was teaching privately, like, that was the fastest way for students to make growth, is through that one-on-one interaction rather than full group. Because again, thinking about like sectionals and full group, like you're trying to work on things that the group as a whole needs to work on, not the thing that you individually need to work on the most. Which, as a side note, like back when I was doing all days, one of the things that I loved is one of the snare techs that we had on one of the years that I marched really advocated for individual time to be able to work on stuff. So we'd play stuff as like a group and then be like, okay, you need to work on this, you need to work on that, you need to work on this other thing that's different from all those other people. Go spend like 30 minutes like refining that on your own, and then let's get back together as a snare line, and we'll try and like put it together and see if we've made improvement. So that's a little pro tip that I highly recommend doing, and that I did as an educator as well. Okay, so the next thing, okay, so this is a 10-minute rule. So how do you get yourself to practice when you are not motivated to practice? So life isn't like this one continuous stream of like pure motivation, where you're able to just like focus on the 20% that's going to give you the 80% of the results, etc. But one of the things that I will do is if I spend like 10 minutes doing something that I might be wanting to procrastinate on or hesitant with like working on or just like not motivated to do, I likely end up like working through that procrastination hurdle and I'm able to just like keep going on it. So it's like once you get that momentum going, it's like, well, why would I want to stop? Like I've already like set up my drums and I'm like ready to go or warmed up or whatever. So if you can get yourself to do that 10 minutes of just like, no, I have to do at least 10 minutes of this thing and then I'll decide whether or not I want to stop, and like if I want to back out or whatever, then that can help you to make consistent progress. Like what I was saying earlier, block off consistent time each day so that it becomes a habit. Like, well, from 8 to 10 every morning, I am specifically going to work on snare drum or marimba or whatever it is that you are going to practice. Prioritize this time so that you spend a consistent amount every single day over an extended period of time. Don't just try and batch it so that you're like a weekend warrior of drumming. Like, oh, I'm going to spend like 10 hours on Saturday. If you actually just spent like an hour a day spread across the entire week, the 1 hour a day, meaning 7 hours, would be better than 10 hours on Saturday because your brain has more time to process over each night when you are sleeping, and you'll be able to make significant gains than just doing like a larger amount of time in one sitting. Let's see. I want to see if there's anything else that I missed with that. Oh, another thing that like writers will do, like comedians and stuff, they talk about how when they set a certain amount of time, like each day to like write or whatever, or in this case, practice, they go into a room and that's all they're allowed to do for that like hour or two. So that's something that you also can do. Like go into a practice room without your phone, unless you're using one of these play-alongs, and just set a constraint on yourself that I can't browse the internet, I can't go on social media, I can't go online, I can't text my friends. All I'm going to do for this hour or two is either practice or do nothing. And if you can set yourself up in those kind of a constraints in environments where that's literally your only two options is either you just practice or you do nothing, then odds are you're going to be like, well, sitting here and doing nothing is very boring unless you're like meditating or something. So I might as well practice for however much time you have. So that might help you out to be able to get through that like lack of motivation if you are not very motivated practice. Okay, so what's the next topic that we had? How to learn from judges' tapes when you've been teaching a long time. Oh, yeah. Okay. So if you're an instructor who's heard a lot of judges' tapes over the years, what do you do when you get to a point where what the judges say don't teach you anything that you don't already know? So one of the things that I recommend doing is to focus on how they are communicating and what they are talking about, as well as what they are not talking about. So let's say they are like listening to a snare break and they're like really focusing on your accent taps and like the fulcrum changes that are going on with the accent taps. Why are they not mentioning the diddles? What about the diddles is working well? Or what about the diddles are they ignoring? If you focus on the things that they are not talking about, that can also inform what you should maybe not focus on practicing in your rehearsals and give you some insights into how people are interpreting the book. So I don't know about you, but if I was working with a line for an extended period of time, I kind of like develop this blindness or deafness to certain things where I'm like just hyper focused on something and I don't necessarily take this step back to like listen to the gestalt, the whole thing. So it can be helpful to get those perspectives and hear again, what are they talking about? What are they not talking about? And why is that? Another thing that you can focus on is like, how are they communicating things differently than what you would do? So as an educator, one of the things that I really liked about teaching is the fact that like every student that I worked with had a different way of understanding the world or a concept that I was teaching. So what I really recommend doing is try and think of like a theme and variation. So the theme being a concept and going, what are like 5 different ways that I can teach the exact same concept rather than like fine tuning one way of explaining something. Try and look at it from multiple different angles because for different students, it might click or resonate more than others. So some students might really like this metaphor and some students might really like this analogy and other students might really like when you explain the mechanics of the exact same concept that you are teaching. So if you listen to that in judges' tapes, that is a way that you can like learn from them without going, well, I already know exactly what they're going to say. Yeah, but how are they saying it? Why are they explaining it that way? And is that different than how you might teach it? and when would that work better or worse in different contexts. Okay, so the last topic that I have written down for this is on social media drummers. So we'll talk about that. And then I'm going to get ready for some Fortnite here in a minute. So stay tuned. Okay, I'm just looking through my notes real quick. So this is more like a discussion on like if you want to create social media content for drummers, or because I've seen some people who are like, hey, how do I get into this? And so this is kind of like advice for that. So what kind of social media drummer do you like or want to be? So do you focus on educational content by teaching a concept? Do you create inspirational content by showing what's possible on the drums? Do you like to create meme content to like get a laugh out of other drummers? Do you like to create reaction content, or is it something else? For myself, I focus on the teaching side of things because I have an unfair advantage with that. I've been playing the drums since 1998, but I've been teaching the drums since 2003. And I've taught every single grade, kindergarten through doctoral student, because I have a bachelor's, master's, and PhD in music education. This gives me an unfair advantage where I have a larger range of experience with like teaching percussion than most other educators who have maybe like a dozen students that they've worked with privately, etc. So because that is my unfair advantage, and because like I inherently enjoy making this kind of content, like I enjoy teaching, which is why I went into it as a profession, I like to create that kind of a content as opposed to like reaction content or inspirational content where I'm just chopping out and showing like basically showing off like, hey, here's this fast thing that I can play or whatever. But for you, you might prefer to do that other thing. Maybe you have better hands than I do, and that's your unfair advantage where you can play faster. So use that to your advantage and share that kind of content. You don't have to necessarily just pick one. Like I've experimented with creating inspirational stuff. Where I was like playing something really fast, like one of these play-alongs, or I've created some meme stuff as well, like drumming on a treadmill and just kind of like during a Zoom meeting, etc. So find what works for you and the kind of content that you want to create, and that is related to maybe some unfair advantages that you have, or just the things that you enjoy creating. Another thing that you want to consider is, are you going to follow the algorithm or are you going to follow the audience? And how much of that is going to kind of influence the kind of content you can create? So there's a continuum, and you can strive for balance between them, where you'd be like, okay, I'm going to make one for the audience and one for the algorithm, and maybe like one for myself. But for me, I personally prefer to create the content that I think should exist, and I'm not necessarily worried about like how the algorithm is picking up stuff, because I've had several years before starting this drumming stuff creating educational computer science education content, and I've seen how that would pick up over time if you just answer a question directly, like how do you do this thing, and then it will eventually make it into the search algorithm. Because I'm teaching educational stuff, for me, that makes more sense. But if you want the viral stuff, then focus on creating meme content or reaction content or inspirational content, etc. And kind of figure out what that balance is between that. Another thing that you can do is you can do like 2 for you and 1 for me. So if you want to create like 2 videos that are specifically for helping out or inspiring or making your audience laugh, cool, you can do that. And then have 1 video that is like something that you really enjoy doing. So that way you're not just constantly creating stuff for other people that you don't necessarily enjoy, and you'll just kind of slowly lose that motivation and slowly get burned out creating drumming content or educational content or whatever. But another thing that I recommend doing is if you're running out of ideas for like things to create or to do, look for inspiration from other drummers, but also other musicians or other artists, and then beyond. So some of the content that I have created education-wise is inspired by like business advice people that I listen to, or marketing people that I listen to. Others is from like, oh, I saw this violinist do this really cool thing or talk about this thing in a unique way, and I was like, I could talk about that in relation to drumming, etc. So like there are many ways that you can get inspiration from different people, and there are many different types of content you can create if you are interested in creating some of this social media type of content for other drummers or whatever. But I've been talking now for 75 minutes. So I'm actually going to get set up for some Fortnite here. But everything that I was just talking about will be turned into some like drumming tips. I'll edit those down and I'll put it into this playlist. And this playlist has dozens of hours of free tips and whatnot from questions that people have asked during live streams or questions that I've seen online, like on Reddit or whatever. that I put into here. All the ones that say members first are scheduled to release. For the drumming tips, it's a new one every single Friday. And for all the play-alongs, it's just a new one every single day. There's over 400 of those. So if you see a bunch of members first stuff, I promise they're all scheduled to release. Just give it time. But there's currently 77 different videos in here that are available for you. When you click on any one of these, there are timestamps in the description in here that have different topics. Woo! So you can see what I was talking about. So like in this video, I talked about you should never stop working on this, how to play fast while practicing slow, the benefits of slow practice, continuous motion when playing slow, tips for improving marking time, 2 ways to speed up your paradiddles, etc. So check out the timestamps and use that as a guide of like, do I want to watch this video or do I want to watch a different video, etc. But as always, YouTube is where you can find everything organized in the Home tab. So if you go here, we have the drumming, the gaming, the computer science stuff. Just click on the header you want, and it shows you only that content, only the plays for there. And then for any one of the play-alongs or any one of the drumming videos, at the top of the description is a link to my website, and that is where you can go to find everything organized. So this is Slash Drum, and we've got all the chop exercises, all the grid variations, all the limb independent stuff, the bass stuff, the technique stuff. Excuse me. And then the playlist for the live streams, the practice streams, the drumming tips, etc. But I'm going to call it here, and I'm going to get ready for some Fortnite. But good questions on YouTube, and thank you for everybody stopping by on the different platforms. Again, there will be timestamps in this video. I'm going to go put those timestamps in here now, and then maybe Fortnite in like 20 or 30 minutes. Depends on how long it takes me to do timestamps. But I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your day, and if you enjoy this content, just share it with somebody else. But goodbye.